let's come to the issue of democratization of schoolings and reduction of inequalities. On the left, it's my book, but it has not been translated in English, Governing the School Achievement, a Political Arithmetic of Inequalities. What I'm trying to study in this book is the way that the state, but some science of government, and particularly psychometry and economists and sociologists, conceptualize the measurement of inequalities and how they provide some advices on knowledge for national policymakers to advance some reforms on education on behalf of democratization and the reduction of inequalities. So it was a time, and the history began really in England in the 1920-30, but it has been copied largely by other states and national states in Europe, at least in France, in Nordic countries. In England, there was great hopes shared by leftist activists and leftist political groups to reduce a very early selection of students, because they were passing tests at the age of 7, and to extend the access of these working class students to secondary education and to higher education. So there was first consideration on first papers we were writing under the umbrella of the Labour Party in the 1920s, and it takes at least I will say 50 years to be successful in generalizing this democratization and this reduction of inequalities at national level in England, in creating the comprehensive school model, which has been spread over in Europe, but has some influence too in the United States. So there were great hopes shared by the leftist party and social movement. And it was linked at the beginning with some concern about the welfare states. What is often forgotten in this story of the global comprehensive school, or even by some English historians, that it was not only a response of the state in terms of education and reduction inequalities, but it was a response in terms of welfare, this development, this creation and development of the comprehensive schools. When you look at the birth of the comprehensive school itself in England, it has been advocated from concern about the wastage of human resources and investment in the human stock. Nobody can understand what it means, human stock, but at that time it was the notion of human capital was not so much developed. It's an invention by an economist whose name is Theodore Schultz. But the idea, which was largely backed in by the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, based on eugenicist views, was that give working class students to access to secondary and higher education would reduce the wastage of talents and will boost the economy and the wealth production. So it justifies the limitation of selection, not only on behalf of inequality of opportunities, but because at that time there was some discussion and concern about the decline of birth and fertility. And this decline of birth and fertility was considered as a threat for the economic development, and it was required from the state to trace and select talents among working class students to ensure a good social reproduction in human capital. So these ideas was developed later in France and in Nordic countries. So from the beginning, we can say that the fight against educational inequalities was linked to the issue of welfare, but also of demography. And through the development of a political arithmetic of inequalities, education has been considered as a social investment, as I've described in my first book, and it forged, to resume Laurent Thévenot's word, a compromise between the idea of social justice referring to civic worth on the idea of effectiveness, referring to the industrial worth that has been conceptualized in the book he has written with Luc Boltanski. So the idea of investing in human capital is not new, and it has been justified by the development of the welfare state in education. In the 1920s, the fact of giving social allowances for children was considered not only as a means of fighting against poverty, but it was a means of developing schooling on the way to limit the number of unfit working class children and to develop the work of women. So the issue of welfare was at the beginning very linked to the issue of education and the issue of health. We have forgotten that the welfare state has been built on two pillars, health policy and education policies. And sometimes you've got some, at least French social scientists who are studying the evolution of the welfare state or the welfare policies. They're looking at the evolution of the health policy, but they have completely forgotten education in the picture. And education must be put at the center of the picture. So at that time, from the 1920s to the 1930s, the planning of population to maintain its good quantity and quality was at the core of the debates opposing eugenicists and Malthusian representatives in England. There have been the same debate in France and also in Nordic countries. And you've got some reformists or progressive eugenists, conservative eugenicity. It was a very important debate with the idea of agreeing or disagreeing about the means, but about the ends of this welfare policy. So, but everybody, if they were disagreeing about the explanation of the decline of the population, in a way, they were agreeing about the idea to invest in the human stock. They were disagreeing in terms of means provided to the states to invest in the human stock through education. So education, since this period, has been linked with the idea of social investment. And later, after the Second World War, it has justified the planning policies through the building of social indicators, which should ensure well-being and equality for all. So in the 1950s, the planning in education was justified no more in terms of eugenicist views, because it has been largely criticized by sociologists, particularly, in fact, but it was justified in terms of the state needed to schedule the number of students moving to tertiary education or higher education, and the necessity to support the economic growth to develop an intermediary workforce for the economic growth. Perhaps it's for this reason that you work on intermediary professions in building the nomenclature and classification of statistics at the INSEE, Laurent. Redistribution, particularly through the social allowances, free meals, for example, in England, but also education compensatory programs were considered as the means to support this development and to reduce inequality of opportunities. So it was a time of the success of sociology of education as a science of government. We were speaking about Bourdieu this morning, capable to develop large-scale surveys to support education policy making. So it's quite important to know about this history to understand the new history of social investment in education. Because, of course, as we know, the planning on redistributive state collapsed with the economic crisis, not only under the attack of the new right, but on the dissemination of neoliberal ideas. But of course, it was important in challenging the idea of the comprehensive schools, particularly in England or even in the United States. But the idea of investment in human capital had not disappeared, and a new calculable world emerged. It has been reconverted in a way into other rationalizing principles which can be easily found in the writing of people like James Exman. You have the photo here. James Exman, the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2000. Here are the main ideas you can find under the writing of this new economist of human capital. First, the idea that investment in early childhood is more important than providing funds for higher education. If you develop skills earlier, it has a greater impact on productivity on the labor market than investing in low-skills adults in post-compulsory education. So it's quite important, according to this economist's view, for these children from the early age to master basic skills, and for the more disadvantaged children to be included in at-risk programs from tests administered by psychologists or neuroscientists, which have a kind of predictive power. It corresponds to a kind of new eugenics influenced by neurosciences and experimental economics. The second idea is that a good measurement in the investment in human capital is provided by international surveys, like the PISA survey. You probably hear about the PISA survey. So for this economist of human capital, this data from international surveys, from PISA, measure the quality and performance of education systems and their contribution to the economic growth. So the higher a country is positioned on this international ranking or benchmarking, the better it is investing in human capital. And with Europeanization, we can say that a kind of the conception of social investment in education by the state has changed. It's not how to invest in childhood and basic skills only, with the idea to maintain access to secondary education and higher education, but the latter, early investment, as more important than the former, as more important than the latter. Why? Because of the lifelong learning space of calculation. For the economics of human capital theory, lifelong learning is a kind of policy assurance to limit risk and uncertainties related to investment in human capital. So it is important for these economists to check that first, dropouts in schooling are limited after having invested in basic skills. Secondly, that individuals are capable to develop and update their skills during their professional life to remain productive. And this policy can be done either by public and private providers. And this social investment in childhood is not only an economist's view, it's largely shared by social scientists, and particularly by Gaspar Esping-Andersen in his book, The 3 Words of Welfare Capitalism, who resumes this economist's idea and argue for the importance in the developing woman work, reduce gender inequalities, and also to give more importance to childhood care and policies. So Esping-Andersen is joining the voice of human capital theorists with the idea which is at stake for the states at European level to develop early skills for childhood to ensure a potential productivity in adulthood, and to consolidate the regime of the post-welfare regime, and to meet the needs for the knowledge-based economy. And if he emphasizes, as the economist of human capital theory, the necessity to limit dropouts during schooling. So this justification in terms of economists or even social views are largely backed in by European policy makers, and it is largely embedded in demographical concern shared by these European policymakers, with the fact that they are quite worried by the aging of the population and the need of this aging population to be better balanced with active workers among women, among special need peoples, among unemployed ones or senior ones. So it leads to the development of a new matrix in education at European level, more focus on dropouts, on skills, lifelong learning skills, on early school leaving, on gender, on disability, and this development of this matrix on data overcome the development of data on social class or inequalities in terms of social class or social background between students, or some metrics in terms of attainment in secondary education on higher education. They don't disappear. It's a sort of mix, and when you look closely at the data gathered on the indicators built for the open method of coordination, you will find some an economic rationale behind these indicators. At the same time, you can use these indicators to claim for more social justice. So it's relativize the idea of a sort of economization or complete economization of the lifelong policy at the same time. From this consideration, it is quite easy, or at least for me, to understand why the European Commission and the DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion wants to develop what is named its social investment package. The idea is to promote a new welfare policy among member states focused on childhood, early school leaving, social entrepreneurship in education, with the idea of introducing private providers in the welfare policy. So the social investment package has been launched in 2013 and consists of a social investment communication, a recommendation to invest in children to break what is named the negative cycle of intergenerational risk transmission. Okay? A series of working papers on policies have been issued, from childcare over education to healthcare, and the social investment package is considered as a social investment strategy for the European Union aimed at guiding national social policies. The idea is that new risks are associated with unstable jobs and changing skills demands, or what could be referred in the papers to a destandardization on the work. Social investment is considered as spanning from a wide range of health, social, educational, and employment services that invest in families with children and later youth and persons of prime age and at risk people, and by strengthening the cognitive skills for all, and by raising and maintaining their abilities to learn and to adapt themselves, the goals are to avoid to these children to drop out from education and to be able to maintain and update their skills for their later entrance on the labor market. So there's lots of discourse, which are held by the European Commission in these working documents. And it has so, the European Commission has also created a specific platform to collect and disseminate innovative and evidence-based practices that would have a positive impact on children and families. So you've got the link if you want to go. I will leave the slide to you if you want to go and visit this website. You find very interesting things. I would like to just to focus for a while on this new vocabulary at the European Commission. Evidence-based practice in welfare, which is also a sign of the transformation of the welfare state with some impacts on education. This conception of evidence-based practice or evidence-based knowledge comes from medicine, from the sector of health. And it has largely influenced the way physicians are trained on how, or nurses too in a way, on how they are reconsidering medical practices. So the accumulation of knowledge is based on randomized controlled trials and experiments which are capitalized and serve as a foundation for clinical recommendation to diagnose and cure people in health. This conception of knowledge and practice has been transferred into the field of the welfare policies, particularly in the United States. They were the beginners in this way, with the development of control experiments in the areas of crime, justice, poverty, and now in education. So experiments become the new means of the welfare state to decide about the effectiveness of a public program, its selection and retention, while randomized controlled trials, a method praised by economists, and particularly by economists of human capital theory, is used. Donc these randomized controlled trials are used for justifying the continuity or abandon of the state intervention. This experimentalism is used also to scale up this intervention into a global policy and to define the ways funds are allocated between targeted people considered at risk. So we can say that in addition of developing social investment through experiment, the new welfare state is associating private providers which are partially or totally funding and leading intervention programs. And these private providers are blurring the border between public policy and private investment. So the state is not only a social investor, but an activating state, meaning that it is capable through incentives to gather public and private actors in social programs supporting transversal partnerships and cooperation through a mix of public funds and private funds coming from social entrepreneurship, philanthropic associations, foundations, and so on. So it is an activating state in the way it transfers some functions of the welfare, protection, care, etc., to activate individuals or requiring these individuals to take responsibility for themselves, for their commitment, keeping good health, updating their skills, caring after their children, with programs of prevention and education that are assumed to prevent risk and misbehaviors. So both medical and psychological research justify that early interventions has a lasting impact on people's life in both health, social, and economic matters. In prime age, social protections help individuals to undertake positive risk behaviors, like taking education and changing jobs. And the lifelong learning develops and maintains skills to keep people in good condition of work. Prime age is also the last stage for efficient health services and social services that can contribute to preventing bad health later in life and increasing the autonomy of future elderly people.